Okay, so this is the book, the large thing is the book that the various experts produce over a long period of time that has just now been finished for 2015.
Correct.
And then that is given to the secretaries of those two departments, which then feed into their ultimate conclusions in this much smaller but still pretty long set
Right.
of guidelines.
Right,
Okay.
and this policy document is, it's an important document, and the reason they look for so much stakeholder input is it forms the basis for nutrition education materials, our food assistance programs, you know, any activities of the federal government that are nutrition related have to be consistent with the advice in the dietary guidelines.
School lunches?
So it involves things like the standards for the National School Lunch Program and Breakfast Program have to be consistent with the dietary guidelines.
Okay.
The education and the food allotments that are for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, which used to be called food stamps, that has, you know, that's based on the dietary guidelines.
Okay.
The food packages for women, infants, and children, the WIC program, what's on the food label, all those numbers, the basis for those numbers are from the dietary guidelines.
So it has some real teeth, so to speak. It's not just a bunch of advice to individual consumers, but insofar as the government is doing food production or food distribution, they have to adhere to these guidelines.
Right. I mean, it affects a lot of programs and
Yeah.
the economics of those programs. The thrifty food plan or the food plans that are used as the basis for determining how much of the SNAP fund someone gets have to be consistent.
Is there now a counterpart of the small pamphlet that was more geared towards consumers, or do we just have these two big things?
One of the pieces that I think a lot of Americans would be familiar with is either the food guide pyramid or My Plate, which is the current food guide. And food guides are different than the dietary guidelines. They're very much related and intertwined. The food guide tells you how much and what to eat. If the recommendation says eat more fruits and vegetables, like, okay, but what does that mean? The food guide tells you that, you know, on average, you should be getting 2 cups of fruit and 2.5 cups of vegetables. And even within the vegetable category, some of those should be red and orange vegetables, and some of those should be green leafy vegetables. Okay. To give that kind of advice in a succinct way, the government has developed what they call food guides, and the one that was developed in 1992 is the Food Guide Pyramid, which I think a lot of people are familiar with. And in 2011, that icon changed to the My Plate, which, you know, it's a picture of a plate. And if you look at the plate, it's sort of cut up into quadrants, but half of the plate is fruits and vegetables. So one of the cues to come out of that icon is make half of your plate fruits and vegetables.
Why did they change from pyramid to plate?
I think some of it was just to sort of give a fresh look. Some of the, there were issues with sort of teaching from the pyramid that maybe nutrition educators were having, you know, a more difficult time. Some of it was just to maybe bring the graphic closer to what people associate with food, which is a plate versus a pyramid. And these food guides have been around for about 100 years. The first one came out in 1916, which was just the government giving advice on feeding young children. Okay. And then during the war, they came out with another food guide called the Basic 7 because they were finding that soldiers were enlisting and were undernourished. So the focus for years was on getting enough nutrients. Nutrient adequacy was the emphasis. They wanted to make sure people had enough foundation, you know, foods in their diet so they would get enough vitamins and minerals that they were lacking. It was in the 70s that we sort of made this connection between overconsumption of certain dietary components, that the dietary guidelines came out that still encourage you to eat more of some foods, but now less of other foods.
So the food guide remains and is now the My Plate.
The food guide's icon is My Plate.
The icon is My Plate. And that's the thing that goes all the way back to 1916.
Correct. Right.
The dietary guidelines, which started in 1980, are now in a way what guide the people making the food guide to write what they do in the food guide.
Yeah.
I see. Is there a loss when we got rid? I grew up with the pyramid. Is there a loss when we get rid of the pyramid of this sense of proportionality? So one thing that I always noticed was that, you know, you've got the sugars or the meats or whatever at the top, and it was very clear that that was a small proportion relative to the fruits and vegetables and grains down at the bottom. Was that a loss?
Well, you could argue that. I mean, one of the advantages of the pyramid, or one of the goals of that pyramid graphic, was to portray proportionality, balance, You know, in some ways, well, people needed a change. We came up with a second pyramid that added a line drawing or a stick figure walking upstairs because they wanted to convey the importance of physical activity.
Right.
So that was added. Then I think they just felt we were ready for a new icon, and then my plate was released.
Okay.